Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo, and have the privilege today to sit down with Todd Conklin. Todd is the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Cyber at the Department of Treasury. Previously served at OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, and prior to joining Department of Treasury, he was at U.S. Secret Service as an investigator and served as an intelligence officer at NGIA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Really excited to sit down with Todd today, and buckle up. Thank you, Todd.
Thanks, Frank. Happy to be here.
Now, really excited to sit down, and Department of Treasury has put out two very significant reports recently. One on the financial services sector's role with cloud, and another on artificial intelligence. And you also rolled out a very cool initiative, Project Fortress, that I know we'll get into in a little bit. But before we jump into the meat and potatoes, I think a lot of our viewers and listeners would be curious and interested in what is a Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer, and are we seeing this role grow within the interagency, and what does a day in the life look like?
Yeah, no, it's first of all, thanks for having me. But part of we have a very captive audience as the Treasury Sector Risk Management Agency for the financial sector. So part of what we're trying to do is get the body of work that we published on cloud and AI over the last 2 years out to a broader cybersecurity audience. So thrilled to be here and have this forum. So thank you. Thank you for the invite. But so I'm dual-hatted. So one primary role is I'm still Deputy Assistant Secretary for our Cybersecurity Office, which is where we published the Artificial Intelligence Report and the Cloud Security Report. My second job then as Chief AI Officer is to begin to lay the groundwork for the responsible internal use of artificial intelligence at the department. So sounds
it's a big job.
Big job, and we have quite a few active use cases across the department. So we started the process about 2 years ago. It's just thanks to the executive order and OMB guidance, they've given even extra oomph behind what we were already establishing in terms of governance around our AI controls, all the way down to the level of contractual reviews, which I, along with our CIO, remain involved with for every single AI contract that the department pushes out, and making sure that everything is being considered, ranging from legal concerns, data use concerns, to ethical use concerns for all of our operations, and then also especially ensuring that the security of our data remains paramount.
And I think it's telling and important that it actually ties AI with cybersecurity, right? Because, I mean, some people see them as apples and oranges. The reality is you cannot do cyber today without an appreciation for artificial intelligence, machine learning, and vice versa. We've got to be concerned about adversarial AI and the like. So your day job, 50%, something goes boom in the middle of the night, that's something bad happens and you kick into action versus thinking ahead. Is that fair?
That's exactly it. And part of the story we wanted to tell in the AI study we published at the end of March was that, well, let's take a deep breath here, right? There's a lot of news around generative AI because now it's accessible broadly, but there's a deep body of work that's been done, especially in the cybersecurity and fraud space over the better part of the last decade or more, both internal to the Treasury and also across the financial sector. So a lot of that story is baked first in cybersecurity use cases, right? The CrowdStrikes of the world are the norm now, right? The behavioral, tactics that we leverage with, AI being the engine for that, is the norm, right? And the idea of financial services sector being a place of innovation, I think, is a surprise, and Treasury being a place of innovation is a surprise to a lot of people, but it goes back to that data security aspect, and the contract that we have that we're going to protect taxpayer data, we're going to protect Social Security payments, and then from a bank, the relationship they have with the customer, that paramount is protecting of your assets, and that relationship breeds a culture of security that enables a risk management posture and program that is now well tested, and there's a healthy balance of federal oversight to test to ensure that that's happening. That creates a great foundation for us to launch off into this new area of generative AI. So,
and do you, and not to put you on the spot, but do you see a day where AI for Blue, the defender, can outmatch AI for Red, the attacker?
Yeah, at scale at our largest institutions, I would say that's been in place for a while now, right? And I think part of the challenge and what we identified in both the cloud study that we published last year, and the AI report is happening at our largest institutions. I think the open question is, how well is that happening at our smallest institutions?
Roger that.
And that's something where government, Treasury, especially a sector risk management agency, has a responsibility to make sure that we're at a minimum leveraging the knowledge base and aptitude of our largest institutions and Treasury itself to make sure that we're helping our smallest financial institutions.
Todd, that's a great point. I mean, you look at JP Morgan Chase, I think they're one of the few that publicly put out their numbers. It's up to $15 billion a year focused on enhancing cybersecurity, and those are big numbers. But you look at small, medium-sized businesses, which largely are the engine of our innovation and economy in the United States, and you start looking at smaller regional banks, that there is a bit of an equity issue there where they're not going to have the resources. How are you getting your arms around that? And maybe this is an opportunity to touch on the cloud report, and then jump into some of the AI issues as well.
And in the cloud report, we detailed that divide between the largest institutions and smallest institutions, especially, and where it's most acute is actually our smallest institutions are nearly 100% cloud to some cases, right? And that's because our smallest financial institutions are often reliant on either the core provider infrastructure or third parties to help with or run their tech stack, right? So they outsource a lot of that.
Just pushing the burden to those that maybe have more resources, right?
Exactly. And then the challenge that they have then, especially with the talent gap issue, is they can't compete for talent with the largest institutions. So there are multiple examples in the cloud report that we highlighted where a financial institution that was 100% cloud reliant for their tech stack had no cloud technologists on their staff. And they had vacancy announcements for years, right? So then the question becomes, how do we help these people, right? How do we help these firms that are forced into cloud because the third-party provider abandoned the on-prem offerings for support and went cloud themselves? So now they're in a position where they have to rapidly adopt a cloud mentality, and it's part of the balance. I'm glad you had Phil Venables on yesterday, because he's been also part of the solution here, right? It's one, how do we baseline what the best practices and standards are? So after the release of the cloud report, where we detailed all these different gaps that we're just touching on at a high level today, we developed a public-private coalition that includes CEO-level participation.
Awesome.
So Bill Demchek of PNC Bank is one of the executive leads, in addition to Michael Su from OCC, Rohit Chopra from CFPB. And that executive group led us through a series of 9 public-private work streams. The cloud providers participated to make sure that we're level setting the playing field for our smallest institutions, giving them the help and information they need to be active, productive technologists with cloud technology, giving them the information they need from a contractual perspective, what they need to be asking for, what the largest institutions are receiving the benefit of for the cloud providers, to make sure that the smallest institutions are getting that same benefit, and also a bunch of other tools that they can put in their toolkit.
And the biggest banks, the Big 7, and it's in their best interest as well to make sure, because they've got trusted relationships, and you're only as strong as your weakest link, right?
And we lived through that during the ICBC FS incident at the end of last year, where an entity that had less than 50 customers had a really outsized impact potential on the operation of the Treasuries market. And we covered this in great detail in the FSOC annual report, and we've been leading a thorough incident response analysis. And that small entity had an outsized impact potential.
We seem to see that a lot. I mean, with healthcare too, clearinghouses that you would never think of topping the list of critical functions,
right.
But we seem to find some of those when a bad day happens.
And it's
right?
certainly not lost on Treasury, and certainly not lost on the entire financial sector, that we're interconnected. And Treasury is also an interconnected operator in the tech space and in the financial space. I don't think people realize that Treasury operates as a bank for the U.S. government. Treasury's infrastructure is how you receive your tax refunds. Treasury infrastructure is how you receive your Social Security payment. So not only are we the sector risk management agency, but we're also a primary operator in the space, all the way up to administering the Treasury's auctions and markets.
And clearinghouses.
Right.
And I mean, the Federal Reserve has leaned forward on cyber issues recently, and I think Chairman Powell often highlights the importance of cyber being the greatest risk, even more so than liquidity and some of the other issues that we've witnessed in the past.
Right. Yeah, and I think I think there's people who scratch their heads like Treasury, cyber, right? We don't, we have a captive audience with the financial sector, but I don't think a lot of people hear about our cyber work beyond that. But there's very powerful vehicles that Treasury either leads or administers across the globe. So I serve as chair of the G7 cyber work, where we work with all the G7 partners on trying to get harmonization around our critical infrastructure laws and issues. Treasury serves as chair of the Financial Banking Information Infrastructure Committee, which is where the Powells, the Michael Sues, the Rohit Chopra, all the heads of the federal regulatory agencies get together to discuss these critical infrastructure issues and oversight issues. And then in addition to that, we run the Hamilton Exercise Program, where we attach with our financial sector. For last year, we ran 12 exercises alone, just to test different parts of the ecosystem, and that's just scratching the surface.
Just scratching the surface. It plays a big role. I mean, I'm reminded. Apparently, he never actually said this, but the old Willie Sutton principle: why rob banks? That's where the money is. There's no question. There's a big target on financial services from a cyber crime standpoint, but the mission is broader than just crime and fraud, yes?
Right.
I mean, it's got national security and economic security implications, which are inextricably interwoven. I can't really tell the difference today.
Absolutely, and I mean, even the DoD machine, right? We have to pay for that, right? And Treasury is the vehicle to which that happens.
True that.
Sector.
And trust and confidence in our systems is always going to be the ultimate, and I think that is important. Before we jump into some of the AI report, I'd be curious, given you played a role at OFAC, and I kind of feel like there are a couple of tools there that can be unleashed to fight against cybercrime. Any thinking going on there that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely, and this dovetails really well with Project Fortress, which we started to publicly roll out just a few days ago. Where how do we move out of this hyper defensive posture where, and you mentioned it, firms are paying billions of dollars. We had to create moats and protections into what we're calling a more proactive defense model that even includes offensive opportunities, right? So in the range of offensive opportunities, of which there are many, Treasury does have control and lead over sanctions activities and actions, which is our ability to disrupt the financial operations potentially of some of these hack groups, the adversaries.
And they rely on trust too, right? And they rely on a system up and running.
Right, and they rely also on U.S. software companies. They rely on some U.S. hardware, which that was a surprising positive impact of the new strategy of aggressively attempting to go after these adversaries who are targeting either Treasury infrastructure or the financial sector infrastructure. NSA publicly had mentioned this in congressional testimony that those sanctions actions that we have been leading have caused difficulty in terms of the adversary being able to gain access to the hardware they need to deploy some of these attacks.
Do you see a day where we can scale some of this? Because, I mean, there are some pretty unique operations that have been implemented recently, and I think they are having net effect, but I don't want it to be a fleeting moment. How do we keep keep our foot on the gas?
Right, we have to take advantage of the momentum that we created with the rapid declassification of cyber intelligence information, which is fantastic, and that it's been much needed and a significant improvement in the health of the entire cyber defense ecosystem. We have to automate that, and we have to create a more direct pipeline and move away from this email world, this Excel world, and automate the flow of intelligence from the U.S. government to the sector defense operators. And that's another big element of Project Fortress, is just starting down that road with a partnership with Cloudflare and Pacific Northwest National Labs to create those initial pipelines for Treasury to do that for the sector.
That could have big effect and big impact, because that's what we're looking for at the end of the day, is to impose cost and consequence or minimize the impact if an attack or a criminal operation were to occur. So whatever we can do to help double down on that, we're all in.
Right.
So.
And going back to the ICBC example, we lived through this. This isn't hypothetical.
This isn't academic. It really isn't.
It was a known it was a known vulnerability out in the wild that was leveraged for the initial impact. A few days later, multiple credit unions were subjected to the same attack from the same vulnerability. Had we had this in place, there's an opportunity for us to immediately scale the solution to this to prevent it from even happening in the first place.
Any thoughts on, because I mean, there are a number of entities that provide safe haven that we lack extradition treaties. It gets hard when you don't have all the good guys fighting the good fight. Any thoughts there that, I mean, to be very blunt, a majority of the ransomware gangs are operating out of Russia or former Soviet republics. There's a lot more we can do in terms of bulletproof. A lot that we can do, but I think we're just starting to push that rock up the hill. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, and going back over a decade, back when I was more on the sanctions targeting side, a lot of the North Korean operations were not being done from North Korea, right?
Obviously. You look at it at night, one's pretty dark, and then you see the south, and it's lit up. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So targeting those areas is a perfect sweet spot for sanctions, right? That targeting the infrastructure that maybe is more connected
and
to
all instruments of statecraft that can be brought to bear to impose costs.
Exactly.
Looking sort of at AI and where things are going, what were some of the big findings? Because I think this was all initiated out of an executive order that was promulgated in terms of looking at risk and Treasury's important role and all that. Anything?
Right. Yeah, and I think people read the cloud report and they said, "Wow, there's a great story." So let's ask Treasury, as part of the executive order on AI that the president published, ask Treasury to do the same thing for AI, which to me is the natural iteration. So our largest institutions some of them are in a position where they're able to do advanced AI development and work leveraging, one, their own internal data sources, and two, their own internal infrastructure. That's a limited subset. Sure. The vast majority are relying on cloud infrastructure for a lot of their AI development, which includes Treasury in that bucket too, frankly.
Pretty much everyone today, right? Yeah.
Right. So
outside of pure OT, but
yeah, exactly. But very similar challenges that we exposed in the cloud report are also true in the AI issue, right? So the difference between the largest and smallest, take that IT tech support issue and then add the data gap on top of it, which is a fundamental challenge that our smallest institutions have, right? So if you're a larger institution, you're able to leverage almost 100%, 90% of your own internal data to do these counter fraud models. If you're a smaller institution, you're being inundated with fraud and you don't generate enough of your data to do the modeling, even if you did.
Which matters. The modeling matters. Data does matter.
Right. So how do we ensure that 5 years from now we're not in a situation where only our smallest banks and smallest institutions are being targeted by bad actors because of that, because of the advantage that the largest institutions have, right? So we have to close that data gap first for them, right? So, and I think there's a role for government to play, there's a role for the core providers to play, the tech companies, and also the large banks to work together to try to fix that data problem.
So financial services has been out in front on some of these issues for a long time. I mean, almost every one of our critical infrastructure sectors has an information sharing and analysis center, an ISAC, but I would say the FS-ISAC is still the gold standard. And how does Treasury work with FS-ISAC and others to ensure that partnership is not just nouns but verbs, it's real?
Yeah, and it's a daily interaction. So it's something that we live and breathe, the relationship. So it's embedded into our operations. I have a weekly check-in with the head of the FS-ISAC, a weekly check-in with the head of the Analysis and Resilience Center, which is somewhat a FS-ISAC equivalent for the largest institution.
with the TRISEC.
Exactly, right. And it's making sure we're aligned on strategy, making sure we're aligned on all of the various programs, making sure we didn't miss any of the intel that's has flowed through the system. And I think getting their support to be alternative hubs for these pipelines that automate the flow is going to be the critical next step here, right? Taking the relationship beyond the personal, Zoom and emails, and then cementing that with an actual data sharing pipeline is the next phase and the next step. And we're already on that road.
And that would mean combined activity, which is where we need to go. I mean, that's where CISA stood up, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, JCDC, but that's only part of the universe we're talking about here. We do need to bring in other actors to this, right?
Right. And kudos, CISA is also a major part of Project Fortress. We're really trying to ramp up the enrollment for their hygiene tool.
Which is a great tool.
It's a terrific tool. If you're a smaller institution, we're trying to encourage everyone. We're trying to hit 1,000 enrollees by the end of next month. We're already over 800 from the financial sector. So we're getting there. The ultimate goal.
How long in?
We really started pushing it a few weeks ago.
That's good uptake.
But by the end of so we're doing really well. And I think the DepSec set the goal publicly that we'll try to have 4,000. Deputy Secretary Ademo said try to have 4,000 financial institutions enrolled by the end of next year.
Wow!
So that's our ambitious goal. So I'm doing the best I can to get the message out.
That's a stretch goal, but good for you.
Right. And it's every week you'll receive vulnerabilities, report from the top 100 vulnerabilities, right? So we're trying to give you intel rapidly into your environment.
It can be ingested, agnostic of sources and methods, so you can push it out.
And then also make sure that we're helping you scan your external nodes for vulnerabilities that you may have, right? Paired with deeper offensive activities to try to protect you downrange. So there's just a range of
that government would initiate.
Exactly.
Largely.
Thank you. Good clarification. That government would initiate. So a lot of proactive options paired with offensive options. I think ultimately that's where we need to be.
I couldn't agree more. And one of and this is an old rock of mine, so forgive me if I'm bringing it up and you don't want to jump into it. But I've always thought for years. We used to have sort of the National Intelligence Priority Framework and taskings and authority. For years, though, I've been suggesting that the private sector drives some of the tasking. In a way, you don't need that if it's combined, right? If you're starting to look at things in a genuine situational awareness environment.
And that's the Treasury.
I'm talking collection priorities.
Right. And the Treasury model is to ensure that the sector has the ability to help us curate what those priorities should be, that they have a voice. They don't necessarily have a seat at the table, right? That's Treasury's
but you
seat at the
serve
table.
as the voice.
Right, and so the daily interaction, understanding what they're seeing, and also activating not technically and absorbing their information, but activating their international eyes,
presence,
their sensors, right? They're going to see this adversary activity before we are, and it really, it's at the heart of another kind of quiet program that we've been rolling out over the last year and a half, which is our international partnership program, where we've now signed over a dozen cybersecurity memorandums of understandings with allied countries.
Keyword allied, I hope here. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then Ukraine's a good example. That's one of the more recent ones. Israel's another example of one of the more recent ones that we updated and publicized. But that then also is an enabler for us to receive what they're seeing from a threat perspective, right? So if you're Albania, which we are becoming very close partners with, they're seeing a lot of activity from Iranian bad actors, right? So we're able to then observe that through that partnership and then pass that information back to our sector.
Which play key roles in providing indicators or potential indicators. I sort of say it might be trite, but it's a movie coming to a theater near you.
Exactly.
And there is real value in all of that.
Right.
And good on you. I didn't realize you were redoubling some of those efforts as well.
And then I think the next front, this is going to be years out, but the next phase is then how do we then also figure out ways to technically connect that? Technically, not just that email and partnership piece, but actually make that a formal connection. So.
Yes, on sort of that AI sets of questions, there are a number of ethical questions, and it's a conundrum that we're trying to get our arms around. But when you sort of look at what the Department of Treasury is doing vis-a-vis what the financial services sector is doing, I think there's a lot we could learn from the private sector here, right?
Right. And
I mean, they tend to be a little more innovative, or at least forward-leaning.
Yeah, and you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of how we even go down these processes of even developing the reports, the AI report, the cloud report, right?
It can't be government lead, private sector follow, or have that mindset.
Exactly. So the way we approached both reports is, look, we have a body of operational experience at Treasury that informs our ability to have a deep conversation with the true operators at these firms. So we invite anyone and everyone who wants to speak to us on the issues of cloud, on the issues of AI. And for both of them, that included over 50 financial institutions and tech companies who had multi-hour, in some cases, multi-days, in more limited cases, conversations with us for their own observations, their own experience, their own use cases, like things that they're doing really well, things that they're struggling with. And Treasury's unique position as sector risk manager is that we're able to thread that together into a mosaic that tells a really profound story. And I think, the Phil Venables of the world, they all have their Rolodex of friends. So they have a pretty good feel for where some people are. But to see all of that at that higher level of, wow, here's actually where the entire sector is on the scatter plot of these issues. It's a profound position to offer the world in terms of those views. So.
And that brings up another point. And we recently hosted the Office of the National Cyber Director, and they came out with their cyber posture report. So we can finally start measuring apples and apples, and maybe OMB and Congress can provide better oversight. Because truth is the financial services sector, even with some of the laggards, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, in small and medium-sized banks, they recognize the importance of these issues. But then you look at some of these other sectors like water that are essential to our survival as a country from a public health perspective and the like, not necessarily at the same sort of modicum and level of capability. So I think we have the ability to now at least start grading. I'm at a university, so we like to give A's, B's, C's, D's. No one likes to get an F or give an F, but we have to get to that point. And otherwise, we can't just spread peanut butter equally, right?
Right, but that's why it's so critical to understand what the financial sector is doing, because it applies across all sectors, primarily because it's already regulated and well regulated, right? So that's why there's already existing risk management principles. There's third-party risk management principles. There's data risk management principles at even the smallest institutions, and definitely the largest institutions, that they are being graded on those, right? And we know what works and what isn't working to some degree because of that process, right?
Sure.
So we are able to then help those other sectors from that perspective of we're living this process, and we do have gaps, and here's the gaps we have, but there is a helpful benefit from having that baseline of oversight.
And the outcome is to have all boats rise. It's in it's in our national security and national interest.
I mean,
right?
the AT&T outage, right? That impacted almost every sector, right? So.
Looking at ransomware, because I think that truly has democratized cyber threats and cyber risk and cyber crime. Everyone is a target, including state, local, tribal, territorial, small businesses. What lessons do you think you can glean? And I know we're still early on, but I kind of, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I kind of feel like the tide's maybe turning in a good direction here, possibly.
Right, and I think we've gotten the right balance now of, and what I mean is the combination of the law enforcement investigation arc with the other tools in our toolkit to impact these organizations. Sanctions, which we talked about, and then there's others on that list that we won't mention here, right? So I think that spread of options and the use of all of those tools in our toolkit in lockstep with making sure we're creating an environment to collect observations from the broader sectors is creating an ecosystem where it's becoming more challenging for these actors to operate.
Do business.
Right.
Yeah. And that will require some international support, right?
Right.
And at least the hostile, some pain for them to continue to provide safe haven.
Right, and now I'm not going to say that the ransomware threat is going to be eliminated. Certainly not, because the tools are becoming even more widespread and more available at the same time.
It's a cat and mouse.
Right.
Always will be.
So.
But do you think we can turn the tide here?
I think so, and I think that's really the goal of Project Fortress broadly at the department, is to make sure that we are activating all of these tools and that's the proactive defense part and also the offensive part of it, making sure that there's an opportunity for a data flow from the sector back to Treasury, in addition to Treasury back to the sector, to enable the health of that process.
And other agencies now have chief artificial intelligence officers, right? Do you guys convene?
We
Is
do.
OMB bring you together, or who?
OMB has been leading pretty regular check-ins, which is fantastic. And I will say one of the things I've been really heartened by is not only the quick staffing of those positions across government agencies, but the concept that a lot of them are being filled with people from the private sector coming into government, which is really fantastic to see, and is needed, very much needed.
We've needed it forever. But how is that going? So what would a typical meeting look like?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, Zoom. First of all, we have done a couple actually at EEOB in some very nice rooms, but we really go around with the highlights of some use cases, some of the challenges we're having. That's where a lot of the conversations are around how do we leverage some of the new tools that the president provided us in terms of recruitment of talent. How do we blend that?
So did they fit in that new carve-out?
They did.
Hires?
They did, and
good.
actually that dovetails. And so one of the things,
so you can actually bring people in who maybe couldn't afford to.
Exactly, and then one of the things I presented on in one of the more recent ones was the Treasury partnership with Google. We've been strong supporters from a distance of the Grow with Google program. Now we formally jumped in as the first federal agency sponsor of a really advanced training certification for both cybersecurity and AI. And Treasury has curated 2 courses in particular with the Google team, and we've made the pledge that if you do go through those processes, that we will consider you for an interview for open Treasury positions. So we're trying to diversify and expand the Treasury talent pipeline as well.
Very cool. Yeah, we need to do that. I think other agencies could learn a thing or two with that approach.
Right,
so.
and the ability to actually now hire based on skills, the skills-based hiring opportunity, which the new executive order provided us, is critical to making sure that we're able to do that.
Now, there's one other community that we've all talked about, but I think we're still not sure exactly the role they play. But I tend to come at these issues, if we can turn to market-driven solutions, we ought to, because it's just the natural way of getting things done. That doesn't mean give a pass for not doing anything. There is an important need for smart regulatory approaches, and financial services sector being a case in point. Where do you see the insurance sector fitting in, and maybe the reinsurance sector into a solution around cybersecurity? Because for years they said they had no actuarials. We were insuring not necessarily what was most important, but tell me where you think this could all
Yeah, great
go.
question. Yeah, we have a lot of conversations. Just last night I had a deep conversation with the team on this. So part of the National Cybersecurity Strategy did request that Treasury begin the process of thinking through a cyber insurance federal backstop. And as part of
sort of
that,
like the old Terrorism Risk
Exactly.
Insurance Act of post 9/11.
Exactly. And we, following that, part of the implementation then of that was we did publish a request for information. We can't just manufacture, new insurance, right? So we have to develop quantitative data, make sure we're doing it in lockstep with the sector. So we did complete a really thorough request for information process, reviewing of all of that, and now we're doing the quantitative analysis on that. And then we're doing a series also of roundtables that the team actually completed, and even just did a outbrief to those at our joint session of the FIBIC, which includes 70 financial institutions to talk through the results of all that. So I think there's a lot of momentum now in a positive direction. So we still don't know exactly where it's going to land, but we now have some quantitative analysis.
What do we see in terms of timing there? When can we expect a report?
Oh yeah, great
or
question.
better yet, someone to actually act on the report.
No, I don't know that there'd necessarily be another report as much as more direct, concrete actions or guidance, at least.
Even better.
Yeah. So. Right.
Yeah. Well, I do think they play an important role in all this, and I kind of feel like we are at the point where we have the quantitative analysis, we have the actuarials, where we can at least build the beginnings of a business case for cybersecurity, and all boats then rise. And that's not to suggest that you shouldn't go above and beyond, because the last thing we want is a check the box kind of approach. But
right.
that I think could lead to a strong enabler.
And part of I think what's helped this process as well is as we've been going through that, collection, first of all, and call for information, has been there's been a firm called the Cowbell, which we met with a couple of times at the department, that have established themselves as cyber-specific insurers in the space too, which are helping us with that kind of data collection process.
Great.
So
Great. I think that good luck on that one. And the reality is, even the biggest banks didn't go into business thinking they had to defend themselves against foreign intelligence services, but that's the reality. They're on the front lines of this. And then you look at small and medium and regional, and it's an unlevel playing field. So hopefully that can level it out a little bit. Todd, what questions didn't I ask that I should have? What else should our viewers and listeners know about the good work that Treasury is doing right now?
Appreciate the opportunity to get the message out there. But I think it's really just trying to encourage people to please, if you haven't yet, please review our cloud study. It's on the Treasury website. Review our AI study. It's the team spent. We spent.
We'll make them available in our show notes.
Oh yeah, fantastic! I appreciate it. And please, always reach out to us if you have any questions. All the contact information is there. We try to create a dynamic dialogue with anyone who wants to meet with us. So really appreciate it and appreciate the opportunity. I guess maybe people do get a lot of there's a lot of interest generally in kind of the threat landscape and how we see that evolving, and then especially to AI. And we did interview, as I mentioned, more than 50 financial institutions ultimately, and tech companies around the use of AI threats generally, and asked every single one of them, like, what are you seeing? What are you worried about? And like, what's new here?
So that keeps you sharp. Yeah.
Right. And then everyone obviously mentioned the email phishing precision, ability to translate, right? There's obviously mitigations in place for that. So there wasn't, heightened concern, but just heightened observation.
DMARC, will we see it fully implemented? So,
Right. Yeah, and I think where people really were concerned, it was within the ability to mimic audio and video and to break through
deepfake
authentications, and that's something that
that's not science fiction.
Right, it's here, and it actually there were two. We didn't go into too much detail in the report about it, but there were a couple of firms that did mention being impacted because of that, and they had to heighten some of their controls to create a little more friction in the process.
So stay tuned on that. The reality is we're never going to be able to declare victory. We're always it's the journey itself. Right. As long as there's something worth stealing, it'll be stolen. Right.
But if you do read the AI report, there's best practices and ways to mitigate for that. So we detail that in the report. So please take a look.
Awesome. Well, thank you for fighting the good fight, Todd. Thank you for joining us today. And I think it's in all of our best interest that your good work succeeds. So thank you for all your.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.